Okay, welcome everyone. I am getting an echo actually. I understand though we're good to go, Mandy? Okay. All right, apologies for the delay. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. This is the second work session on AM 496-2022 contract with Roger Hickel, contracting for Navigation Center building. It is Thursday, October 20, 2022. We're scheduled from 1:20 to 3:20 p.m. today. We're starting a little bit late. It's 1:34 p.m. And we'll go ahead and start with introductions for the record.
Pete Peterson.
Kevin Cross.
Cameron Perez Video.
Daniel Boland.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance, and then on the phone, I believe we have Ms. Allard. Ms. Allard, are you there? If you are, we can't hear you. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
I'm here. Hi, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Honest, do we have any other members on the line? Okay, and then around the table, we have members of the administration here.
Kimberly Rash, Anchorage Health Department.
Alexis Johnson, Anchorage Health Department.
Amy Domboski, Municipal Manager.
Blair Christensen, Acting Municipal Attorney.
I'm not a member of the admin, but I'm Assembly Council Dean Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. And we also have Ms. Honest here, Ms. Roughton, and Ms. Ross as well for staff. Okay, thank you all for being here today. AM 496-2022 is item 11E on Tuesday's regular meeting agenda. There is a timeline document available for this meeting that if you go to muni.org/worksessions, you will be able to get that timeline. Pardon me. Before we begin, and my intent is after my remarks to turn back to the Muni manager to continue walking us through the document with questions and responses. I want to address some recent statements that have been made by the administration about the Navigation Center project and specifically about the role of the Assembly in the project. I also want to point and highlight to some of the facts on the timeline concerning actions for the project. And first off, thank you to members of the administration for being here. At the last work session, I very much appreciated the acknowledgement that there had been an error in giving the green light to the contractor to proceed with the construction portion of the project. Thank you for addressing that point directly. And I believe that if this project is going to move forward, we are going to need that level of honesty and transparency. So the first statement I would like to address, the administration has repeatedly said that if it weren't for the Assembly, the mayor would have opened his navigation center by now. I don't want to detract from the administration's recent efforts to improve communications with the Assembly around the issue, but I can't let this statement go without being addressed. And the reason why the navigation center has not been built yet is because the Assembly has not yet received a thorough plan from the administration to see the project through to completion. As of today, we are still waiting to see a comprehensive project budget that includes design and construction costs, FFE permits, and contingencies. We're still waiting for a detailed operation plan and budget. We've yet to see a total project cost estimate that we can be confident in. And I just call attention to the timeline, which identifies the actions that have come before, or the items, excuse me, that have come before the Assembly and the varying estimates for the cost and how that has changed considerably through the course of the discussion. The cost estimates have ranged from 10 to 22 million, but none have come with details from a professional cost estimator that factor in the entirety of the project. We've been asked to greenlight a major capital project without knowing what the total costs will be. And every time we do hear from the administration, we're given a different number that includes different portions of the project. So again, please look at the timeline. It shows those costs highlighted. Despite all of this, I would argue that the Assembly has always been open to hearing the mayor's plans and has actively worked to support them with moving forward with the Navigation Center. Even before the mayor was sworn in and he first announced his intentions for the Navigation Center, he and his team were invited to speak at 3 separate special meetings of the Committee on Housing and Homelessness. So a head start could be made on planning and fast tracking the plan through the Assembly process. But when it was formally brought to the Assembly on July 13, 2021, and again, that's should be on the timeline in there, he announced a new cost estimate of 22 million, which was a jump of $12 million from just a few weeks prior, with very little documentation to back it up. Many Assembly members spoke out that they couldn't support a project with a rapidly increasing price tag without more detailed information. And while the project didn't pass that initial hurdle, the Assembly did jump into action within weeks to form a joint task force with the administration to develop more fully a plan. And this was the facilitated collaborative working group. Assembly members who participated in that and community experts and members of the administration invested hundreds of hours in the joint work group and kept the Navigation Center as one of the key tenets of the plan throughout the process. So when we fast forward to spring of 2022, it had been nearly a year with time for the mayor and the team to plan and coordinate, but the proposal still lacked basic details, still no detailed budget, still no professional cost estimates, and still no plan for funding and sustaining operations. But even without that specific information, the majority of Assembly members made a good faith effort to support the project, and on May 10, 2022, voted to appropriate funds to keep moving forward on the Navigation Center. I can't speak for my colleagues, but I voted yes on the appropriation because our community needs more emergency shelter, and I wanted to give the mayor a chance to continue developing the case for the project, knowing that approval of the construction contract would need to come back to the Assembly before funds could be spent. And I'm going to speak very plainly here, because unless we have some sort of shared starting point on moving forward, it's going to be really difficult for this project to succeed. And through the past year, the Assembly has provided feedback on what is required to move forward. And there has been information withheld by the information, and procurement rules have not been followed. And there have been meetings where we didn't get the expected progress updates that were needed. Again, we have yet to see a comprehensive project plan, which brings me to the second point I want to address concerning the funding. I want to clarify that the Assembly has not pulled back funding from the Navigation Center project. The funding is still appropriated. The funding is still there. I repeat, the funding has not been withdrawn. However, per code that governs municipal procurement, Assembly approval is required for the $4.9 million contract amendment that we're discussing today. According to the law, it was supposed to be obtained before construction started. This contract amendment, again, is before the Assembly for approval at the October 25 meeting as AM 496-2022. And I want to reiterate that it is still possible to gain Assembly support for this project, at least my support. I can't speak for anyone else, but there is work that needs to be done and the case needs to be made for why this project should continue. We can't have another SAP that costs taxpayers millions of dollars more than originally estimated on an end product that took years beyond the initial due date to deliver. And finally, for those of us who worked on large capital projects, we are accustomed to seeing a project plan that includes professional cost estimates, detailed budgets, permitting status, and operating plans. And I just, again, ask the administration and recommend that in order to move this project forward, that you consider hiring a professional program manager to pull these pieces together, set up a project website, start providing weekly updates to the public and the Assembly, and again, provide those plan documents, including an operations plan. And I just want to check, will the mayor be joining today? Not that we know of. Okay.
I wasn't aware that the mayor was expected to join, but I'm here.
No, he's always invited, and this is, I know, one of his signature projects, and just would be nice to hear more from him. But with that, I will turn to the municipal manager if you would go ahead and continue to walk us through the document. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we had ended with the construction portion of it with Mr. Wilbur, who is on his way, so he'll be here. If you have construction-related questions, he'll be here to answer those in just a little bit. But we were prepared to go on and start talking about the operations. And I actually have a slide deck that I'm going to be emailing the assembly right now, which will be coming your way. And Ms. Johnson will be walking through the operations portion of the navigation center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alexis Johnson, Anchorage Health Department. I'm joined today by Andy Nestor, also with the Anchorage Health Department. We're going to be walking through a PowerPoint that Ms. Demboski is sending out right now to cover our operations plans, what we envision. This is a working document, and we are obviously still in the preliminary stages of an operations plan, but this will give us a base model for operations costs yearly for the navigation center.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, Andy Nestor. I'm the Housing and Homeless Program Manager for the Anchorage Health Department. Like Alexis said, this is a preliminary document, but it has had a lot of input from several providers throughout the 2 years that I've been here, as well as taking some of the best practices that we have found. You can't see it yet.
We can just go through this if you want.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were just, I was talking with someone here
It's okay.
on the phone. And go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
I just wanted to have you expand a little bit on that for me. You just said that it's informed by a number of providers. If you could maybe just give us a little bit of sense, maybe in the presentation, but who was involved in developing this sort of plan, and what kind of sort of industry experts and that sort of thing did you utilize in order to develop the operations plan? Thank you.
I will try to inform that. I did have a person that was coming with all the backup documentation, but I asked him to not come. But we have consulted with, and I'm going to get the organizations wrong for the national organizations, but we've consulted with other cities in Minnesota, Texas, in Canada, Washington, and several others that we've called. And the thing that's important to know is that this group, my group, is also responsible for shelter licensing. So a lot of those conversations have happened simultaneously with talking about best practices for shelter licensing, as well as what is happening in their groups and what is working well. So additionally, we have had individual meetings with just about every provider. When we talk about specifically for the navigation center, it's important to know that we can't specifically put a plan that we're going to put out for RFP in its exactness out to any provider, because it would give them an unfair advantage. But several of the organizations that we worked with and several of the recommendations we took were from Hope, Covenant House, Rural Cap, Catholic Social Services. All of those have had some input into this, even if they didn't realize it was exactly the navigation center. There were just specific questions asked to them. So the first thing that's important is to understand that there's two kind of components to this. One is the navigation center, and one is the emergency shelter. I see them as two separate operations. The navigation center is something that is open to the public throughout the day at hours, and we estimate 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then the emergency shelter is also open 24 hours, but it will operate with the similar rules that you see at the Sullivan. And if you haven't had a chance to go see the Sullivan, I would love for you to go see the Sullivan and the operations that are happening there today. But that the emergency shelter would provide shelter, food, necessary medical, clothing needs. There will be case managers there, planning. I really hope we can get the document up, because I have some depictions of how the organization would be set out. So these are co-located facilities. So since we're also in charge of shelter licensing, the navigation center and the emergency shelter will be licensed under one license. So I believe a question was asked will it go through a shelter licensing process? And that answer is yes. The emergency shelter covers individuals that are checked in. So those are the individuals that come, they need services, they have a bed to sleep in, they have a place to put their things, and then they are also able to access all of the services of the navigation center.
And if I could just pause you for a moment. The slides that you have we sent those out to?
I sent them to all assembly members.
Okay. When were those sent?
About 5 minutes ago.
Okay, so folks on the phone, I don't see it in my email yet.
Did I send it to the wrong server?
Okay.
I sent it to the assembly agenda instead.
Okay. And Ms.
Forwarding it right now.
Ms. Honest is going to post it online at muni.org/worksessions. And then I just want to make sure folks on the phone have a chance to get that. Okay, it's just been sent for those of you on the phone.
And I'm happy to see it is up on the screen so you guys can follow along. So if you go to the next slide. Next slide. Next one, please. This is what I was talking about, the definition of navigation center and emergency shelter. Realize we pulled those definitions from Title 16.125, which is the shelter licensing regulations. Next slide. I just finished explaining this slide. Next. The vision. And again, this is a work in progress. Definitely going to ask for input on what the vision of it is. The assembly asked for a vision, and the biggest part of the vision is it's a low barrier shelter that addresses homelessness by meeting people where they are and offering them choices on how to change their lives. It is designed to help address the trauma that people experience throughout their lives, which led them to their current life situations. The vision is to help every client see a path forward and bring hope to their new lives. That is our biggest vision, because we recognize for everybody who has helped us create this vision, we recognize that sometimes the difference between myself and somebody who's homeless may have been just one decision in my life that I had made differently. Next slide, please. The mission, these are just basic mission, again, still a work in progress. But it's to serve as a starting place for people experiencing homelessness. So anybody could come here to get navigated. If there is shelter space available, they would then be assigned basically a bunk. If not, they can be referred to other shelters. So this would basically be a central facility in which people could come to figure out, what can I do next? So it's 150 low barrier shelter beds for men and women. So one of the biggest things that we've learned is that we need to have men and women separated and also have a special populations area for all those things to occur and for it to be monitored all the time. And then a surge capacity of 50 clients when it is authorized by the assembly. Next slide. If you have any questions on these slides as we go along. Very basic 4-pillar strategy is that everybody will have an assessment, everybody will have some sort of intervention in their lives, and then be prepared to transition, and then they'll have decision points that they'll be able to make. One thing we've learned from Hope and Covenant House is that sometimes a emergency shelter is the housing of choice for some people. We don't want it to be necessarily, but at Hope House, they've had some people there for 5 years, and eventually they were able to come out of that. Now, is the idea to have somebody there for 5 years, and is that a rare case? Yes. But we do recognize that some people feel comfortable in an emergency shelter because that is what they've known. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the services offered, and this is for the emergency shelter. Right now, the model that is at the Sullivan is that there are 2 hot meals a day, plus there is a sack lunch. Guests have really appreciated having a sack lunch. Even though it's not a hot meal, what it does is it's really reduced the waste of food, because they found that a lot of shelter guests are not there during the lunch meal, but many of them are going to work. Many of them are just going around the city, and they appreciate having something that they can carry and eat as they go along. And there is an incredible less amount of waste. Front door monitoring.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
thank you. So are the sack lunches there in time so that some people who are leaving to go to work can take them with them for lunch?
Yes,
Great. thank you.
absolutely. And just so that you're aware, there is a huge cost savings because for Henning Inc., who is operating the Sullivan, they have received several donations. So we have not had to pay to make those sack lunches happen. We have fresh fruit and produce being delivered daily, all those kind of things. So it is really awesome that we have not had to have an extra cost for that third meal. I know I need to go faster, I think. So intake, person, laundry, mail facilities. So you can see all the things that we're planning, right? One of the most important things I think is the recreational area. And that's where people can congregate together and build a community. As we know, the homeless community is a community. They do want to work together. They do help each other. And in the cost estimate is a recreational coordinator to help bring those activities there to help them start to recover from their trauma. Next slide. Budget and organizational structure. This is just an overview. So this is a little bit different than what you saw, because I realized that the table on your table that was in the agenda, it said 57.53 FTE or something relative to that. It was not adding up all of my personnel. So there is approximately 76.53 FTE. I'm going to explain to you how I got to that estimate. And it is a one person. So if you want something staffed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it is 4.2 FTE. And that is for one person, 24 hours a day. And there I can show you the calculations behind it. So we did everything with an FTE. If it's 12 hours a day for 5 days a week, then we did it for that. Food for 2 hot meals per day is approximately $876,000. If there were to be some kind of kitchen or cooking facility on site, that would reduce that amount. The snack grab and go is donations. A lot of this other stuff is estimated. Equipment for $30,000, and that's for recreational activities, for basketball hoops or whatever it is that is needed to make those recreational areas a pleasant place for them to be. Utilities is really dependent on so many things, the time of the year. So that's estimated about $100,000 a year. We know from the insurance that is required for the Sullivan and other mass care facilities that it is between $100,000 and $120,000 for a provider to get insurance to cover this population for between 150 and 300 individuals. And then training is important. That's 0.05 FTE. We know that training time is necessary if we want to keep all of our providers trained and safe and trauma informed. So I also added a training cost in there. And then there's an indirect rate. I put it at 15%. So the bottom is basically 10%. But this is a huge operation with a lot of people. So I raised the indirect rate to 15% because there is going to be a lot of admin that is not counted in this cost, but that would go to whoever the provider that is chosen.
And if we could just pause for a question. Before I go to you, Mr. Constant, I want to note that Ms. Zalatel and Mr. Dunbar are at EMATS and excused, and Mr. Solt is also excused. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. Looking at that top number, 76.5 full-time positions at $3.8 million. Is that a fully wrapped number, like benefits and everything?
Yes, it is. I've added a 25% fringe to that, as well as, there's a 25% fringe that I added on to that.
So we're looking at $50,000 all in for our employee on the average. That's benefits and everything.
Yes, there is a detailed breakdown sheet because for different positions and qualifications, there is a higher and lower salary. So somebody who is a shelter manager would get paid different than potentially somebody who is a door monitor. But there is a spreadsheet behind this that calculates all that.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing it.
Next slide. So if you look at the leadership, so there's a facility leadership, which is the shelter manager. I foresee an MOA liaison being there to help facilitate the relationships, the donations, all these other kind of things. Additionally, that person would be very helpful in coordinating both sides of it as well with the shelter leadership. So you have the navigation center side, and then you have the homeless transient assistant shelter side. So if you see, I see there's 3 units under the navigation center. One is the case management. We know case management is important. We know that a 1 to 25 caseload is a little high, but that would be our minimum that we'd go by. Crisis support. We know one of the biggest things that is missing that has easy access is counseling, substance abuse, counseling, many of those things. And it does break it down, as well as work and life skills, which we'd also have a job coordinator, which I'll explain more. And for the shelter side, you have the service side, which is all those food, laundry, mail, things like that. And then you have the monitoring side, which is the shift leads on that slide. So if you can go to the next slide, it'll break down a little bit more for you. This just kind of explains what I see the MOA liaison doing. Go to next slide. And for the leadership, there's a shelter manager. So since there's 2 sides, there's a shelter manager and assistant shelter manager. Each one of them would be responsible for making sure to coordinate one or the other side, depending on how the shelter manager sees it. And then an additional role is that training, compliance, admin support, which is for everybody in the shelter, making sure that the training is done, that they are in compliance with all the federal regulations, and if there's any HR needs. Next slide. So here is the table that breaks down. So you get to actually see it in person on the rates that we used. And what we used was industry standard rates that we've seen across Anchorage with how much each individual is paid on average. We did try to make sure that it's worth it, because the other thing that we are really looking forward to is having a stable workforce. If you are constantly changing out case managers every other week or every other month or even every 6 months, it is very prohibitive for people who are experiencing homelessness to be able to recover from the trauma, because they're constantly having to tell their story over and over again. So you can see the price points for those, plus the benefits, which, as I said, is a 25% fringe. And if you go to the next slide, and I also put at the top the overall budget for that section, so you can see where the different costs come from. Next slide. Did we just miss a slide? Nope, there we go. Okay, so these are the different things that are in the emergency shelter side. So we're talking specifically emergency shelter. Shifts are 24/7 operations. So every single one of those people is a 4.2 FTE. there is a minimum manning requirement. So something that I used in my former life as police is that we had a minimum manning requirement to make sure that if we go below that minimum manning requirement, that we know we need to call additional people in for overtime. So naturally, there will be 11 people that are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The day minimum manning requirement is based on the fact that we need a front door, we need an intake person, and then we need enough monitors for 1 to 25 ratio for the people in the shelter if it's at max capacity. The night minimum, the reason why that goes down is because it's a 1 to 50 ratio for the nighttime monitoring. And when I say nighttime, that means 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. All other hours would be the daytime manning requirement. And then you see the different services that are offered and the approximated hours and number of days a week that it would be open for. Next slide. And here are those positions. Again, this is the backside of how it was calculated with the FTE and how many there are, and then estimation of where those monitors would be sitting. You see the safety personnel are written into this plan as well, and those are roving personnel for inside or outside of the building, wherever is most needed. but we expect that shelter manager will have the ability to move people around as needed. Next slide. Now we go to the shelter services, and this is people that are manning the laundry. We know that we need to have an attendant or a person doing the laundry. Otherwise, the facilities they tend to have increased maintenance for them. We have a food pantry lending closet, so that would have clothes and food there, similar to what is set up at the Aviator. A personal care attendant. This has been something requested by almost every provider in the city of Anchorage, that they wish they could have a personal care attendant. This would not be a Medicaid billed position, but this is a person that's helping those that are maybe less mobile, less able to go do things. They would help with shower, with feeding for those that need it. Then you have a medical person, and they would be the ones triaging somebody who comes in with, let's say they come in with frostbite, then they can triage them to send them to a clinic or to South Central Foundation or several other places, as well as a non-critical transportation driver, which we do want to have transportation available for a significant portion.
Thanks. I just have a question on the wages. Are those competitive? The one that caught my eye is medical, public health nurse, average salary, 52,000. The benefit load, that does seem a little low. Usually I think we use about 50% for a benefit load, but in today's market, is that a competitive wage?
I'm going to apologize. I put those in because we believed we could pull from uni personnel, but the rest of it should have been deleted. So the average salary and the benefits should have been deleted because we believe that we can fill those potentially with MOA already positions, people that exist. So that's not the competitive salary for medical. That's just, I did not delete that.
Okay, I may have some follow-up, but Mr. Cross?
Yeah, thank you. Following up with that. Yeah, I'm as an employer who employs many people, I'm concerned that our wages are not competitive for some of these positions as well as the benefits that their MOA employees. I just got done meeting with Parks, and my understanding was if they have a full-time employee that makes $45,000 a year, the muni benefit load is almost $40,000 a year. So I'm concerned that our benefits numbers and our numbers are very conservative, particularly in a job market where most businesses are operating at 70, 80%, even everything, school district, parks, you name it, planning. We're all operating with a 20 to 30% reduction. So I guess the other part of this is after we go through this is what is the plan at a 30% staff? And what is the minimum number of employees you need in order to be to operate at 150? And I guess we'll go through that. But that would be another question is, are we competitive? And if we're not, that means you're going to have a significant labor shortage. And in light of a labor shortage, how do we continue to operate? So thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Cross, thank you very much. We will definitely look into it. The thought process that was used is a tiered step as well, so that people have positions to move up to so that they will stay within the navigation center. But we will definitely look into the pay ranges.
Any follow-up, Mr. Cross?
No, just wondering if is there a third party or an outside consultant who can say what your pay wages should be? I don't know, a neutral third party who can give insight as to what it's going to take to man the operation so that we're not either being hyper aggressive or overly conservative. Thank you.
And actually, I would just jump in and add on to that. The municipalities' participation in the communities of care, is that the right term? Not continuum, but communities of practice, not communities of care. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Communities of practice, I would think would be able to provide some of that information as to what it would take to successfully operate in terms of market wages or staffing. And so I would want later an update on the involvement with the communities of practice. Thank you, Mr. Constant. You're next.
Thank you. To follow up on where Mr. Cross was going, I think about the recommendation of 30% of your income towards your housing. And in that framework right there, the only one that achieves 30% is the medical or the personal care attendant. That's at exactly 30% to afford like a single bedroom apartment in Anchorage. And for those other positions, it's closer to 50, if not in excess of 50% of their annual income would be going towards a single bedroom apartment. And so that, I think, is from this slide, what we have to really tune into is it's not practical reality as we see it. So yes, the feedback from the community is practice would be good, but I think somebody might have suggested if we're not careful, we're going to be creating homeless people because they can't afford to work for us. You know.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
And that's all I have in the queue for now. At the end of the slides, we'll go to Mr. Rivera.
Thank you. Next slide. So now we go to the 3 different sections of the Navigation Center. As you see for case management, we have 3 case managers. We've also recognized that a case manager has a lot of admin that needs to be done for them, as well as contacting providers and trying to get paperwork for clients. So we also included an admin support for those case managers. A peer support coordinator. Recently, HUD had visited Henning, and they have expressed how their peer support network is, I'm going to try to use the right words, that they are, go ahead.
Through the chair, Alexis Johnson. When we had met with HUD, they had told us that we are leading the nation in a peer support model, that we should write it down and we should replicate it nationwide because it is so successful.
And so the peer support coordinator is a person who is trying to get other people who have experienced homeless to sort of be a sponsor. If you look at that model that is in other industries. So we're really looking forward to that. An outreach coordinator, a special populations coordinator, and a homeless prevention coordinator, because we recognize that we don't want people to just come to this center who are actually homeless, but this may also be a place for them to prevent homelessness by using the resources that are available at the center. The next section is the crisis support. This is the part that I really hope that we can build into this navigation center, because it provides basically an on-demand way for somebody to see a counselor, somebody who is going through a hard time, a mental health crisis evaluator, so that we can see what might be the best option for them. But they would work with the case managers to help assess what is the best place for this person to go. Substance abuse addiction counselor, we have 2 of those. I don't think we could have enough of them, because there's a lot of people who are always trying to get help, and that having an immediate person who is experienced in that for a counselor would be awesome. I don't know if that's a word you use here, but, and then a substance abuse coordinator, and that's the person that is actively trying to get people into those treatment beds, as well as the detox facilities. And we know that there's not enough, but person coordinating that for the people in the shelter, or even those that just come into the navigation center, would be a huge addition to that, to the navigation center.
Mr. Constant?
I don't know if those are budgeted positions, but I would suggest that this is where good community linkage is important, that you have providers that know how to bill for these services independently. And so I think this is an area that the community could pick up the burden for. And in fact, in the Texas program that I visited, Haven for Hope, they just set up a place and authorized certain providers at certain times to provide their services on the location.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And then the third unit is the work-life support. We've recognized that workforce skills are important, but also our life skills. So not only would they have life skills that would be trained there, but workforce skills, as well as several feedback from several of the providers has said that having a job navigator there to almost have a work-ready force. There has been several providers that have, several businesses that have come out and said, if you could just provide me a person, then that would be good. I'm not sure how to explain it. There's more there, but somebody who is navigating people into jobs, if that person falls out of the job, then we are able to put another person in that job. So we have always a work ready force.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there someone that's helping some people get signed up to start getting GED degrees. There's got to be dropouts that are among this population. Is that something that's happened before or could happen? Add to the list?
Absolutely. Currently, the health department has a contract with a 9-Star, and they do a lot of work with that population. And I'm sure they'd be more than willing to come in and provide their services there as well.
Great. Thank you.
If you can go to the next. And there's that back end table. I'm going to accept the feedback that I need to take this to the continuum of practice, and I probably got it wrong too, Ms. LaFrance. So, but this is just the estimates that go behind that. Next slide. The crisis support services, this is the estimates that go behind it. And for the workforce life skills and job navigator. Next slide. The startup costs. So I am not familiar with the FTE, but I do know, I mean, with the FF&E, but I do know that at a minimum there, we would like to have beds and mattresses, not cots, but beds and mattresses, so that, and this would be things that could be there to make them feel, because we know we want people to come out of trauma. It's hard to do that on a cot. So there would be beds and mattresses. There would be a cabinet storage area for them. There would also be bedding. We know right now that we would need to buy a few industrial washers and a few industrial dryers for that laundry attendant. And we also want this place to feel like a pleasant place to be, that somebody comes in here and they're like, wow, this is really nice. I like to be there. And that's part of that office furniture decor, is just making sure that there's things that you can't say or pay for, but I want a feeling in all of those individuals that come into this place that is a welcoming location with recreational activities. And then the unknown items are, I always say, don't know what I don't know. And that's what that line is. I wanted to really recognize the amount. So even though there is a number put on this and an estimate, that there are many donations from the community, as you have said, Mr. Constant, that would probably lower that overall cost that I had put up there. For example, in just a very short period of time that Henning has been running the Aviator as well as the Sullivan, they have gotten more donations just by reaching out to people than they had received ever before. So free barber cuts, pizza and donuts, fresh produce being delivered, blankets, towels, hygiene kits. They have more blankets than they know what to do with right now, as well as independent people are doing capital campaigns to raise money for the shelter, which is really amazing. But it does recognize that even though there is a number put on this, that there is some that the community is willing to do to help us to run this and make this successful as well. Next slide. Okay.
Thank you. We will go now to Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have 3 questions. First one is regarding some of the language that I've seen used throughout this slide that's been confusing to me. Particularly, I see on several slides the use of the word emergency shelter. And, as I understood it, the navigation center and shelter was never envisioned as a permanent emergency shelter, rather was envisioned as an overnight shelter. And in fact, if you look on slide 4, the code that you cite here, Anchorage Municipal Code 16.125.015, is actually the code for overnight shelter, not for emergency shelter. So I guess I would like to hear an explanation from the administration why they seemingly use the term emergency shelter, although it's not used throughout the document. Was that just a lapse of an error, or is that intentional? Thanks.
Through the chair, Ms. Rivera, thank you for pointing that out. I would say that was, we're going to take it and we'll connect with you to make sure that we get it consistent throughout the document.
Okay, so then I just want it to be very clear. Then it is not the administration's intent to turn this on as a permanent emergency shelter, rather to turn this on as a normal overnight shelter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So second line of questions I had is, I found it interesting when you were answering Mr. Perez-Verdia's question at the beginning of the slides regarding
Ms. Honest, is our system still working? Okay, so we just lost Mr. Rivera. Sounds like he's
Sorry,
reconnected.
guys. I don't know why that happened. That happens sometimes. I'm back, Madam Chair.
We were disconnected to Mr. Rivera, so it wasn't just you. I think it was everyone on the bridge.
Okay. Got it. So just want to confirm you all can hear me in the room?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, I was a little bit surprised when you answered Mr. Perez-Verdia's question at the beginning of the slides. So here's what I heard, and then there's a question at the end. So I heard you say that you reached out for specific navigation center advice from a lot of different jurisdictions in the lower 48, and I think you also said in Canada as well, which is great. It's great that we're getting advice from other jurisdictions. But I think I also heard you say something peculiar about the local advice that you got, and that, if I heard you correctly, you said that you didn't ask necessarily for specific navigation center advice from local folks. Instead, you asked for generic questions, which is interesting to me. I'm not sure why exactly you took that tactic. That said, my question is, one of the things that I have been pretty hard on is that the municipality must meet its commitments regarding the navigation center if it wants my continued support. And several of the commitments include being part of a community of practice for a navigation center and being part of a community of practice for a low barrier shelter. So it appears to me that the administration has not met those commitments yet. If the administration has a different point of view, I'd like them to share that and why. But my question is, does the administration plan on meeting those two particular commitments? Thank you.
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, it's Alexis Johnson, AHD. It has always been my intention to collaborate as much as possible on all projects revolving around homelessness and the people experiencing homelessness. If there's something that you feel like I'm not meeting the needs on, I would love to communicate that and attend wherever possible that I can. My door is always open, and I hope that I'm invited to every other open door to communicate on homelessness. Thank you.
Thanks. So sorry, I had to keep pushing for really direct responses here. So does that mean that the administration will meet its commitments to join communities of practice for both the navigation center and the low barrier shelter?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, yes.
Okay, thank you for that direct response. So then, Madam Chair, I just had one more question.
Sure.
Thank you. So that deals with pages 13 and 14 of the slides, where you detail the MOA liaison / service coordinator and 3 leadership roles. The slides are a little bit confusing. Are these positions going to be health department positions, these 4 positions, or are these going to be contracted out?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, there's only one position that we had envisioned would be an AHD employee. The other 2 would be contractors.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's it for me, Madam Chair, for now. Oh, and I guess just a final comment. I appreciate all of this information. I think this is information that the body has been eagerly awaiting for a while. So I'm glad that we're able to get it. And hopefully, if I have any other questions, I will email the administration, but I appreciate them getting this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Just to follow up on Mr. Rivera's questions about the communities of practice, I need to practice saying that. I mean, how do you plan to go about getting involved? I'm genuinely curious. Like, do you have contacts you will connect with? I guess that would be to Ms. Johnson, who's nodding. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about setting up that relationship.
Yeah, through the chair to Ms. LaFrance. So as you know, I did step down from the administration to take on this role full time with the Anchorage Health Department. It was my vision to come into the health department full steam ahead. As you know, emergency cold weather sheltering was being stood up right when I came into my new position. Now that I feel like that is underway, I've been meeting with ACEH, with the executive director. I met with her this morning, along with HUD. We've met with United Way. Tari has been really great. I'm willing and able to meet with anybody who wants to listen to me talk about homelessness. As you know, I really do like to talk about it. And I just want to keep those conversations ongoing. So over the next few weeks, I think I'll step out of the emergency cold weather sheltering and jump into communities of practice and trying to communicate with all providers and see how we can help and how AHD can collaborate with them to make it better.
Thanks, Ms. Johnson. It sounds like then you are connected with folks who can help facilitate those relationships and further connections. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. And maybe Mr. Rivera can correct me if I'm wrong. He probably has this better in his mind. But if you come back to the timeline that was established, shared by the chair on 5/10/22, it talks about the appropriation. And it speaks to the fact that there is a written commitment required to good faith effort to operate the Golden Line. But weren't there also two requirements? One, to participate in the communities of practice of the Navigation Center, and one, to participate in the communities of practice, I believe, on emergency shelter. Maybe I'm not quite remembering that. But weren't those part of that resolution as well?
Who's that too? Who's that too?
Mr. Rivera.
Madam Chair, I can respond.
Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Thanks. So this takes me back to one of the many presentations that I have done over the last month and a half. So there are in total of 5 commitments. 4 of them are outlined in AR 2022-146 as amended. They are 1, to be a part of a community practice for a navigation center, 2, to be a part of a community practice for a low barrier shelter, 3, to develop an operations plan for the navigation center, and 4, to develop an operations plan for the low barrier shelter. And then the 5th commitment is AR 2022-111 as amended, to make a firm written commitment regarding the former Golden Lion. Those are all of the MOA commitments as I've recorded them.
Thank you. So at least we're getting close to 2 of those now. Well down the path, I think. And so I would like that we reflect that in our timeline at some point. And I'll get that to you later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant and Mr. Rivera. Any other questions at this point from Assembly members? Mr. Cross?
Have you already started building your employment team, putting out positions, trying to fill those? I'm counting roughly 59 full-time positions according to the spreadsheet. If I'm just curious on what that looks like. My concern is we build it and we can't staff it, or we're shorthanded, and then it sits there vacant until we can provide adequate services. So like filling those immediately, because in an employment, there's a triangle we use, which is good, cheap, fast. And if you want good people fast, they're not going to be cheap. You know that whole analogy? And so that's my biggest concern. We build a beautiful facility and it sits there because we don't have the manpower. Can you talk about our current attempts to staff it?
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I'm so sorry, Mr. Cross. We have not, the resemblance is uncanny. So I'm glad I can bring a little bit of laughter to these meetings, because stressed out. Through the chair to Mr. Cross, we have not started our job employment. I mean, we're in our very preliminary stages. This is a working document. If this is something that we can get everybody on board with and move forward with, we would love to start that process. Yes. Sorry. You want to jump in?
I would like to assist our former homelessness coordinator. I'm just kidding. Just joking.
She might sleep better at night.
You're okay. We are not going to be hiring 59 new municipal employees. They're going to be contractors. So I just want to clearly say that. So everybody sees 70 some odd FTEs. We do not envision those to be all municipal employees. I just want to be very clear about that.
Anybody else? Thank you for providing this information. I guess I would just ask, and we received the PowerPoint, if you'll be putting it together in a plan format. Yes. Okay. And if you could include like the business plan component, which, would typically include all the potential revenue sources or funding sources, such as what Mr. Constant referenced with billing as well, that would be very helpful.
Through the chair to Ms. LaFrance, that business plan is already in the works right now. We just have a few more final details, and then I will be reaching out to some community partners, especially after Mr. Constant's advice, to see where we can fill in the gaps for funding.
Great, thank you. Anybody else at this point?
On this topic or any topic?
I think we're about to move on, so I think you can, if you want to.
No, if there's more on the agenda.
Well, no, I mean, have we gone through the entire document? I think this will bring us to question 39. Are we on community impacts? Or actually, I'm just scanning through here. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Now that Mr. Wilbur is here, I previously requested that we are provided with a response. I don't have the number to the item. I think it was number 26, which was subcontractors and the amounts, dates of awards. So are we going to be receiving that information?
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, if you just give me a moment, I got the information. I'll be able to share that if you just let me find it. I apologize for being late. I wasn't aware. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can go ahead and get through maybe the rest of the document and then come back to some questions concerning funding and the contract. Actually, I think, are we on 32, the Emergency Shelter Task Force?
One last question before we pivot. I had a text from a member of the public that asked the question, to be really clear, will the shelter be operated by the municipality or a contractor?
Can you please restate the question?
Yeah, just are you going to run it through the department or is it going to be a contractor in your imagination at this point?
In my imagination, this will be a contractor through the procurement process.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
No, I think they just gave us their approach.
So I just want to check in with members. I'm looking at the list of questions because a number of the questions were addressed in the presentation. Thank you for that. For example, question 32, and I believe that this document, do we have it, Ms. Honest, available or posted for this work session? Otherwise, I believe it was posted for the prior work session. Navigation Center update dated October 7, 2022. Just so if folks are wondering what it is we're referencing the list of questions and responses provided by the municipal manager to the assembly. we'll make sure we get that posted online. Do you want to go ahead and continue walking through that document?
Through the chair to Ms. LaFrance, I did just want to add that on the question 32, we had typed in an answer that said ACEH, and I wanted to correct the record and just say that that was the emergency task force, emergency shelter task force, not ACEH.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Okay, do members have any questions on that part? Again, we did walk through, or the administration walked us through the identified costs for the operations for both the adult shelter and the navigation center. And so some of these questions address staffing. Sorry, I'm just reading through here. And if anybody have any questions on this concerning shelter licensing, otherwise we'll move on to community impacts.
Madam Chair, I don't know if you got my text.
Just got it. Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so on question 32, I don't think we have to go through a process to amend this, but I do think that the slideshow that we just went through regarding operations does change the response to that question. In fact, the new costs put forward by the administration in the slideshow very much mirror the costs almost exactly of the emergency shelter task force. So just wanted to make sure that was on the record. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And again, that's pertaining to question 32. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. And separate from the document and to the department on the conversation about shelter licensing, when we passed the shelter licensing ordinance, it was quite an interesting conversation. This was two administrations. It was a long time ago now. We passed what we contemplated to be a pretty straightforward program that we anticipated could be managed by the department with the staff that they had, just with a new kind of checklist and process and review, and not what we heard back from the department, again, under a different paradigm, where they told us that they needed 12 new staff and they needed, hundreds of hours of labor to go through the process to create this licensing scheme and get all of these shelters licensed. And I am hoping to communicate, if that continues to exist within the department as a framework, that the intent is not to create a giant regulatory program for shelter licensing. It's to be as streamlined as possible, but to provide some structure. And so just as a matter of context for you, know that there was a difference of opinion between the assembly who adopted this code and the health department at the time, who thought they had to write books and books about it.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I want to assure you that one, I have a very bright employee that has been working on this for several months now. His name is Michael Hughes. I do need to give him praise. Our intent, as we have briefed at the HAND Commission, is to make this not a stressful process, but to create guidelines. And we have passed some of the initial how we determine what is a day shelter to ACH. And they have provided us feedback, and those documents are about to go out for community feedback. So I would appreciate your feedback when that comes out.
Thanks. And like I said, the balance should be toward just a basic checklist and effectiveness to make sure that the programs are delivering quality services and with minimal impacts, but not an auditor coming in with an intensive program to, fine tooth everybody and how they're doing their business. So
through the chair, Mr. Constant, exactly. And we are 100% with you.
Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, one of the questions, and maybe we covered this while I was just reading through the notes, I apologize, is that it said that the building permitting issues that were resolved should have been resolved by October 14th. Do we know what the status is on our permits and the issues that we were having?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Cross, I believe they have been addressed. The one issue was, I think I mentioned last week, Development Services wanted some extra support inside the structure, some extra bracing just for snow load. And I
Okay.
think those things have been addressed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. And I do want to note that for today's work session, there are a number of documents, including the timeline, the navigation and emergency shelter presentation of October 6th, and then some contract documents. And the memo to the assembly is posted on that. Oh, shoot, I just had it. Actually, we don't have it. Okay, we'll have to get that posted. And that's the memo we've been referencing with the question. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll go back to going through the memo. And we're at Community Impacts 39.
Madam Chair, I think I can address these. The responses came from Public Works. So the first question is, have we engaged the DOT? Yes, we talked with the Scott Thomas, the traffic engineer at DOT. I think the concerns or questions he had was making sure that there were any pedestrian activity that might be associated with the navigation center be directed towards the signalized intersection, the protected crosswalk. So we've been working with them. We do not require anything inside the right of way. And yeah, we've had several conversations with them. So as for those who might not know, DOT owns Tudor Road. So that's why we had the conversation with them.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Okay, just to clarify, going back to the point about this list of questions and responses, it is posted under October 7, 2022, and it is called Navigation Center Update 10/7/22. So anyone who's wanting to follow along, if you go to the first work session, you can find this document. Any questions on the community impacts portion? Okay, the next part pertains to the Golden Lion, which we had pretty robust discussion about at yesterday's committee meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. Do members have any questions about this section of the responses? Go ahead, Mr. Cross. Looked like you were unmuting. Okay, so now we can go ahead and go back, Mr. Constant, and we'll take up any questions members have.
Thank you. So Mr. Wilbur, do we have that response to question number 26?
We do. Thank you, Mr. Through the chair. So we asked Roger Hickle, contractor, who is our prime contractor, to give us a list of subcontractors to date. There are 6. The first one, and they're not in particular order, one is Specialized Construction. They did some demolition work for us on the site, roughly $32,000. Hydroax Alaska to clear the site, roughly $36,000. Solana Surveyors, who helped us survey the site, at $30,000. Northern Reinforced Placers, basically they help us set the rebar, and that's at about $50,000. The next 2, we don't have invoices for them. So one of them is Malone Construction. They helped us with the concrete placement, and that's roughly $12,000. We don't have an invoice from them. And the last one is McKenna Brothers Trucking. So we had them haul material to the site. We do not have an invoice from them. So my estimate would be from the invoices we have, it's roughly $150,000, and we do not have an invoice from the trucking company. So it's a relatively small amount of the total amount that the Roger Hickle has put on the site. A lot of the work has been done by their forces, the prime contractor. So hopefully that answers your questions, and thank you for the question.
The terms of the contract require that 10 days before a subcontractor comes onto the site to conduct work, they have sent to you a list of contractors. So that you had to go back and ask them for it is a little disconcerting, but it's not such a big deal. But I just, having now read the contract, recognize that there is a specific term that says contractors, in order to be authorized to conduct work on the site, the contractor must send a list 10 days in advance. I'm not reading that wrong, Blair.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, I think there might be some disconnect because they're on APD property. That's probably for CGIS clearances purposes. So there might just be some disconnect between we're asking M&O, but it might have been APD who gotten it. We can check into that. Does that make sense?
I don't know if it makes sense what it says for the purposes of the construction under this contract. Any subcontractor must be provided to the muni 10 days in advance of work. And so
Right. That's probably being provided because it's on APD property.
I don't know.
They have to get CGIS cleared because of our criminal justice information systems.
Right.
And so APD might have that information. We can check on that for you. I'm just saying that we had been checking on, it's an interesting point that you have pointed out, but we've been checking with maintenance and operations who might not have been the recipient of that information, but we'll check.
And I maybe it should be M&O, but I think it probably should be procurement, purchasing that gets that information.
I think it might be APD that gets the information because they have to run the CGIS check. And it's on their property.
I appreciate that. I think we're talking about two things. I think one, we're talking about security checks for access. And one, I think we're talking about for subcontractors to conduct work on a project for a municipal contractor, they have to be identified. This is all part of the responsible contracting process and the other elements. And so I am not a attorney who studied chapter and verse, but the way it reads is it's for the purposes of the construction project, not for the purposes of access to the site.
I think there might be, and now that you say that, it might also be the OEO process where they go through and check for they have a process by which they ensure that our contractors are complying with EEOC regulations and stuff. So that might also be true, but we might just have a disconnect in that maintenance and operation might not have that operation. And it might be at either APD or OEO or purchasing.
Yeah, I think it's purchasing probably.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 3 things from me. First is, I do want to note in that community impact section of the questions that the questions there were mainly tailored around DOT and road impacts. I think sticking to that first before I go on to the second point, I think just thinking of a lot of the community members surrounding the proposed Tudor and Elmore site, that I think those one-word answers are not going to be sufficient to assuage the concerns that the community members have regarding particularly the road impacts. On top of that, we didn't really address any other types of community impacts besides the state road. So I certainly hope that this is something that the administration will continue to think on, ponder on, work with the community on. Perhaps this is something that's considered in the communities of practice. However the administration decides, I think this is particularly important in how you deal with this and how you communicate it to our constituents and your constituents, because this is a big area of concern and is something that we very much glossed over in our review today. Second is on the Golden Lion written statement. I appreciate that the administration attached the statement from the mayor on June 1. I will read just a portion of the statement, and then I have a question for the administration. So, quote, I have asked the facilitation group guiding the mass care exit to recommend the best option to providing substance misuse treatment centers in Anchorage to address current community needs. The mayor's evaluation will consider all possible options, including 1000 East 36th Avenue, parentheses, formerly the Golden Lion, and parentheses, end quote. So it's obvious to me that this written statement, although I appreciate it, is somewhat defunct because we no longer have a facilitation group. So question to the administration, will the administration be providing an updated written statement, sort of providing an updated firm written commitment to the public and to the assembly regarding the need to provide substance misuse treatment centers and the need to look at all possible options, including East 36th Avenue, formerly the Golden Lion. because again, the facilitation group doesn't exist. So I think this firm written commitment is a bit outdated.
Through the chair, this is Amy Domboski, Municipal Manager. First, I have to apologize because Mr. Trombley is our AMATS rep on, and he is in an AMATS meeting right now. So I'll be happy to take your question back to the mayor's office, but I would like some clarification. And maybe I misunderstood you, Mr. Rivera. Are you asking for us, the administration, to provide commitment for treatment at this location? Because my understanding is now the assembly wants this location to be used at housing. So I'm hearing two different things. Could you just clarify that for me so I can get you a clear answer from the mayor's office?
Sure, thanks. So I have been clear in the past, and so I'll try to continue to be clear about a few things. First is that the assembly did approve the usage of the Golden Lion as housing. Now, that said, the assembly still, well, myself and several assembly members, I'll say it that way, have stated that we want the Golden Lion to be used in the end, as it should be, as a substance misuse treatment facility. We have until some date, I believe in October of 2025, I might be wrong with that date, but sometime in 2025, to use the former Golden Lion as a substance misuse treatment facility. So when the assembly says use it as housing, we say use it as housing for a certain amount of time, and then by 2025, let's turn it on as a substance misuse treatment facility. So I hope that clarifies housing versus substance misuse treatment.
It does. And just
at the same time, I also want to clarify that for myself, it's important that we do a review of all possible options, including the former Golden Lion. It's something that I've repeated many times, and I hope that people start to understand that the former Golden Lion is one of many options we should be considering regarding substance misuse treatments. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, thank you for that clarification. And it's my understanding when you said that by 2025, we have to use it as treatment misuse facility. It's my understanding that the MLMP RCA order that came out did not actually specify a location. It specified municipal property in a municipal building. So that's, I think, where it's coming from is the administration. In my understanding of the mayor's position, he's not just looking at one location. He's looking to see if there's other locations that might also be conducive. But I'm happy to take your question and get you a more robust response. And I will do that expeditiously.
Okay, thank you. I guess just the final comment before I go to my third thing. As I started this, I said that this statement, which the mayor provided on June 1, is out of date because we no longer have a facilitation group. So I think it's really important for the administration and the mayor's office to take that under consideration with regard to that commitment, which is still important to me, which is to make a firm written commitment regarding the former Golden Lion. Moving on to my third point, which is members will notice that earlier today they got emailed a document and it's posted on the work session titled Arctic Rec and Elmore Sprung. And that is something that the Emergency Shelter Task Force, which is still meeting on a weekly basis, their facilities subgroup decided to do a comparison between usage of the Arctic Rec Center, which is a new facility that came on the market very recently. It wasn't on the market when the facilitated process existed, so the facilitated process did not consider this facility, but now it is on the market. And it's a comparison between the Arctic Rec Center and the Elmore Sprung structure on Tudor and Elmore. So it's not a complete comparison because there's a lot of question marks that need to be filled out, but it is something that the Emergency Shelter Task Force wanted policymakers to be able to have at hand as a point of comparison for when we as policymakers make our decisions to spend millions of dollars to continue the Tudor and Elmore project. So I just wanted to note that for the record, for the body and for the public, if they wanted to review that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I put myself in the queue and actually following along on some of Mr. Rivera's comments concerning community impacts. I just want to go back to the point about having a unified project business plan. And for example, such a plan that I talked about in my opening remarks would contain the project purpose and vision, the expected stakeholders and plan for usage, a community engagement plan, including concerns and outreach and plans for addressing those concerns, facility and site requirements, legal issues that have been addressed, and identification of potential future issues, management and operations plan, and then any financial data, and including permitting information, site prep, and so on, FFE, annual operations, and then drawings and designs. And that way too, starting with that plan, as portions are updated, it's easier for assembly members and members of the public to follow. But we always have that unified document in front of us that we can reference to and look at, again, the areas that have been updated, including what kind of outreach is going to be done to address those concerns, not just about the road, but potential, fire issues and security. And then I wanted to go back to questions about the contract and finances. And, Mr. Wilbur, I appreciated your straightforward response last time concerning the approval from the assembly that's required per code, how that hadn't happened yet, and that it was an error that work on construction went forward. And it would be very helpful to me if you could talk a little bit more about how that happened to assure me that there aren't other kinds of errors out there of such a magnitude, and what is being done to ensure that code is being followed, process is being followed, who's reviewing to make sure, for example, all the procurement rules are being followed and so on. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. I will try to remember them all. So as a reminder, the process that we used to complete or to work on the navigation center is the construction management general contracting process. And we followed that process as we had shared that with the assembly, and the purpose to do that was to get the most efficiencies and our efforts to get the structure delivered this fall so that we could make it available by this winter. And while we were doing that, the assembly had taken action to put money aside to appropriate to fund that effort. As you may recall, there's, I think, $6.2 million from two different pieces. So Public Works proceeded in good faith to proceed with construction management general contracting. And the way that process worked, and in the memorandums that we shared with the assembly, would be that we would work through those, negotiate those work packages that are described here on this, and then come to the assembly and ask them for an amendment to the contract to proceed. What we did was we negotiated these work packages and then gave permission to the contractor to proceed. What we should have done is negotiated the processes, agreed on the packages, and then come to the assembly for amendment of the contract. The challenge of it is that the process that we chose is it's very efficient. You get a lot of opportunity for efficiency in delivering it quicker and a little bit more expeditious while still getting a quality product, which is a little different than the typical procurement process, which is you have to do this and then you do that. So the two processes from the typical procurement and the process that we chose don't match. What we should have done is come to the assembly, we had the packages, and then gave Roger Hickle and their firm the opportunity to go. I think that was the misstep on our part. So going forward, we know that we have to, if the assembly supports us in finishing this project and then completing this project, those steps will be assured. I mean, not only in from my position, I also know that the municipal manager and purchasing are making sure that we follow those procedures, and we've committed to them that we will do both. And so that's moving forward. The other parts of your question, I forgot the other two parts of your question. Maybe you could remind me.
Thanks. And mostly I want assurance that there aren't any other large magnitude errors in process or just with the project out there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are not. I mean, really what the process that we followed was the construction management general contracting process. We haven't swayed from that process. We've been very true to it. And the difference between what we've done in the past and what we'll do in the future is we're going to continue to follow that construction management general contracting practices for the purposes that we selected. The difference will be that hopefully with your support next Tuesday night, we can continue this project. And if beyond the request we're asking, as you remember a couple of weeks ago, we let you know that the total cost to complete the project would be additional resources. So we would need to find what those were. We'd need to come to the assembly, secure those dollars, amend the HICL contract, and let them proceed. So that will be our path forward.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. I have a couple other questions, and then I'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson. So I understand from looking at the contract that the NTP is the notice to proceed is supposed to be issued in writing to the contractor. So has that notice to proceed then been issued in writing for the $4.9 million for the construction portion?
Through the Madam Chair, I will have to verify with the project team how they were given the go to proceed. So let me follow up with that with you.
Thank you. And then, and this will be my last question, then I'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson. I do have a question on some of the pre-construction work. There are a number of POs and they're not listed here, but I have a list and it's quite a few different design firms. And some of them are pretty large amounts, $100,000, $255,000, $80,000. Again, a number of POs. And I'm curious, why wouldn't there just be a prime who would subcontract out for different portions? And are any of these term contracts?
Excellent question. So the contractor that we use for the design effort is separate from the request that we had through Roger Hickel. That was basically construction management and construction, the design. To support that effort in the design, separate from the $6.2 million that you set aside for the construction, you also did an appropriation where there was $2 million set aside for the structure and $800,000 set aside for the design. We started the design process through our term contractor, and they probably had some subcontractors with them for permitting or things like that. So the Roger Hickel effort is connected with the design effort, but the funding for the design effort the assembly had already set those funds aside, and we used our term contractor to advance that effort.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. I'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to Mr. Wilbur as well. I wasn't completely tracking, so if you can just clarify for me what you said earlier regarding subcontractors. So you said there were receipts for a number of them, and the way I understood it was that those that you have receipts for totaled $150K, and then there were a couple that you didn't have, or I'm sorry, invoices for. And then there were a couple that you didn't have invoices for that were perhaps the remaining
Through the chair.
amounts. And then one more thing, what I understood from last work session was that about $3.5 million had been spent on dirt work. So I'm just trying to understand how it all adds up. Thanks.
Through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, you have it about right. We had 6 subcontractors. The Prime let us know that they had invoices received from 4 of them, which totals about $150,000. 2 of them have not invoiced the prime contractor. We estimate one of those is for concrete work at about $12,000. The other one, we don't have any estimate, and that was for the trucking. And that was for the hauling and of all of the material they brought in for the base. So that is what we have right now.
And may I ask a follow-up?
Sure,
Madam
go
Chair?
ahead.
So should all of that work add up to the 3.5 million estimate you gave us last week?
Oh, thank you for the question and the clarification. So the bulk of the costs is through Roger Hickle Construction. And so, I mean, that's the information I'm getting from the contractor. So, and we will do our best to find out what the trucking portion is as soon as we can. Does that answer your
Okay, so
question?
you're saying you don't think that, I think so. I think you're saying the 3.5 is not necessarily just for subcontractors. It's also for the contractor itself.
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, any updated numbers you have is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Next is Mr. Cross, then Mr.
No,
Constant.
and I guess just my clarification, because based on my recollection, we had Roger Hickle Contracting had 2 million that they had advanced for the sprung structure, and then of which then we had aggregate for contractors. They had cleared the site, they had set the foundations, they had done the rebar, and I don't know how far they were, and they had held off on pouring any concrete, but they had done the site prep work, brought in the whatever gravel, whatever they needed for proper compaction, so they could do the foundation. But concrete hadn't been poured yet, but they were getting ready to, and that's what we're held up with, and that was the major weather concern, because as we see as it gets colder, once they have to tarp it off and heat it in order to maintain 40 degrees for a specific amount of time for the concrete to set, in order for it to set properly with the proper temperature load as required by code or just by construction methods. That was where we were in the process. So, what I hear doesn't differentiate. It's from what we heard earlier, if it gives any clarification, because I saw a look on your face, Chris. So thank you.
Yeah, so I was in the queue next, and Mr. Franz handed me the gavel, and the shock on my face was because what I had previously heard was that the contract for the dirt work didn't exceed $150,000. But then what I heard from Lance was that, no, we don't know how much that one was. And so that was my look of surprise. And so I had tracked it wrong. And so what I'm going to ask is, when this is all said and done, that you put all of this in writing for us so that it's in a coherent format and we're not making wags about what you said. And so it'll be just better that way. And another question that I have is the appropriation request, or the authorization, that is before us for Tuesday. Does that authorize more work beyond what's in this list here, or is this the sum total of what, if we say yes on Tuesday, is going to happen? Or are we going to find ourselves in yet again another position where $5 million of work advances before it comes back to us, and we're like, what the heck just happened?
Through the chair, let me take those. So it does include what is on here, just to recognize that I believe one of those regarding utilities, the install the utilities, they were not all complete. That request is to complete everything. So this is the agreed upon packages to complete that amount of work. The second thing, and Mr. Constant, Assemblymember Constant, I just want to, my apologies for the confusion. What I said earlier, what I thought I said earlier was the amount of invoices that we have to date totals about 150,000. The 2 invoices that we don't have complete we're estimating there's 12,000 on construction, and the 150 does not include the trucking because we don't know what that amount is. So my apologies for that. And then I guess my last, just a point of clarification for a comment that Assemblymember Cross mentioned, and that is when it comes to the sprung structure itself, the municipality didn't front load that money. Basically, that they were the assembly appropriated money to a nonprofit. The nonprofit then provided that money to Hickle, and then Hickle used those resources to acquire the structure. Our request for the total amount, we're not asking for money for the structure because they've already got that, just to be clear. And I appreciate the question, and hopefully, I think maybe just a matter of semantics. Thank you.
So again, I look forward to that list of contractors and work that's been done in the detail in writing so that we have that to base our conversations off of and not just speculate. So our other members have questions? And if you're on the phone, you can text me to get in the queue. Ms. LaFrance had to step out briefly. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Lance, I see at the bottom, it's saying that the 95% design is talking about cost savings, and then we've got the 185,000 in red. So by designing it, we saved 185,000 toward the total construction costs, or am I reading that wrong?
You're not reading it wrong. Basically, as we got through the design process, our original estimates on the design, the savings that we had on the total project through the design process, right now we're thinking that we're going to save roughly $185,000 than we had originally planned. But even with the savings, the total amount of that work there, including the structure, is how we get to roughly $8 million. But thank you for the question.
All right, thank you.
Somebody before the meeting asked me to ask the administration for basically all the signed documents between the contractor and the municipality so that we can start to create a track record of all of these things. And so I'm going to be withholding that question for now and just holding out for the details on the subcontractors, but that's where the conversation is going, and members of the community are asking, how did this get negotiated? Who authorized it? What are the specific terms? Who's doing what? There's a separation of powers issue that arises here. And it is very present in my mind that we have to pay attention to these things because so much has been made of it since July of 2021. And the separation of powers issue is that the administration has effectively created a process by which a massive contract can be offered, contract work can be done to the tune of $5 million, and then have to come back to the assembly and ask forgiveness. The old Alaska way, don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness. And so I'm not sure how we systematically approach this, because if this is the new paradigm where we're going to be put on the hook because there's a massive outlay of cash and labor by a contractor to the municipality that we didn't provide, how do we protect our branch of government's authority to authorize expenditures? It doesn't mean anything anymore is the question that just kind of keeps chewing in the back of my head. Does it mean anything anymore when we're existing in a paradigm where after the fact we're being asked to appropriate for funds that have already been spent? Where does that leave the contractor who's done all of this work, who's supposedly or apparently, and we'll see soon the detail of what that they have done, that we've been told that they have put their own money bags, their own treasure into this project without authorization. So then the assembly is backed up against a wall and told, you're going to get sued if you don't fund this. And there's a moral argument that they did the work for the municipality, that we should pay it. But there's also a moral argument that says, if we pay this, then this is forever going to be the new deal. And this is going to be how business is done in this municipality. And so I don't know how to square those two issues. And that's the philosophical question I'm going to have to start with over the weekend. I can perceive a scenario in which this process just continues and perpetuates. So I haven't figured it out.
Madam Chair, if I could just clarify a couple of things. The CMGC process is a new process I was completely unfamiliar with. And this is a process that is relatively new to the municipality. This was in the appropriating documents that the assembly passed. And I think the intent was always to work with the assembly. And I think what you saw is a new process that now we are understanding better how to work out those internal mechanisms and at what point Should we just stop and say, okay, yes, it's supposed to be a design build, but let's not get this far down the road without bringing the assembly back in. So those are all internal processes that we are instituting to make sure, something like this doesn't happen again. Because the intent of the administration was never to usurp the assembly's authority. Again, we outlined the CMGC process. We said, this is the process we're going to use in the appropriation documents. Unfortunately, again, this is a newer process in the municipality. I know the private sector uses it a lot. But I think when you institute a process like that in the government, I think it's, especially when you're dealing with an appropriating body, I think it's beneficial for us to institute checks and balances and benchmarks by which not only we understand, but the assembly understands, and that we have adequate internal oversight to make sure that it doesn't get away from us. So I can just assure you, Mr. Constant, this is not the norm. This is not how I envision our construction contracts to be managed. And I can just tell you, sitting here today, I have had many conversations internally with staff, and we have been developing processes to make sure this doesn't happen again, because our goal is to communicate clearly and make sure that you feel well informed, and that at any time you can say, okay, where are you now with the project? And we can tell you that. That's our goal.
Thank you, Ms. Denbosky. Any other members have questions? I guess I just want to note that I'm feeling like this is a pretty high barrier to overcome, if I'm speaking frankly. I mean, I'm someone who was somewhat familiar with the CMGC contract approach, because perhaps maybe just in other jurisdictions, it's a fairly standard way to do it. However, I still don't quite understand how in any situation a contract would ever be perceived to be outside of the requirements of code. I appreciate that there's an acknowledgement of an error, but again, that's a really high barrier for me to overcome. I'm just going to be really frank here, because I still don't quite get it. And I also don't understand the piece about, and maybe Ms. Christensen, you can weigh in, because I know you had mentioned something when this item first came before us about the liability piece, because I'm really uncomfortable with some of what's been put out there as far as us being on the hook for something that we as a body didn't get to execute our duty to approve. Go ahead.
Thank you, Claire Christensen. So to be frank, if I had to tell you what I thought the issue was, I think we had new people to the appropriation and versus contracting process in the municipality. And because the appropriation said, and I don't have the appropriation in front of me, there was some line in the appropriation that said that the administration will go back before the assembly when the contract's fully negotiated. The people who were interpreting that language did not come to the legal department. And that was interpreted to mean that when they finished negotiating the whole CMGC process, they would come back. Unfortunately, by that point, we had started work and had progressed fairly substantially in that area. But by the time it came to legal, we said, no, there's a difference between the appropriation and the contract approval process. And so I think that's where the confusion was. It wasn't, I don't think anyone ever thought that a contract that was $4.7 million did not have to be approved by the assembly. I think there was confusion in reading the appropriation language as to what that meant. As to the legal issues, I think, and Mr. Gates can weigh in, that under the law, regardless of the contract approval process, if the government engages with a contractor in good faith and the contractor does that work in good faith and they deal with people who have the apparent authority of the municipality of Anchorage, then, the law has remedies for that. The law says either you had a contract in fact, or a quasi-contract, or there was what we call promissory estoppel, that you proceeded in reliance on the other party's representations, and you did that to your detriment. And so I I mean, if the assembly does not approve the contract, I think we will learn whether any of those theories apply. But I think it is reasonable to think that a contractor that proceeded with construction at the behest of, the administration, directors of specific departments, whatever the case may be, did so in good faith and had a reasonable belief that those people have the authority to act. So I guess that would be my answer.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. I guess my initial response is that an experienced contractor would know how it works. And the contract says there needs to be a written NTP, notice to proceed, before proceeding. So good faith is one thing, but not following the terms of a contract is another too. But thank you for that. I appreciate it. We're almost out of time. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thanks, Blair. So that point exactly gets to my fear. That in good faith, someone receives information, but maybe not in good faith, someone expresses information. And so they're doing work on behalf of an unauthorized project. And now we're on the hook. And that's what's the shift in the kind of separation of powers. Like if that paradigm exists, then we are in a dynamic where the legislature doesn't matter, that it's only the mayor's power that matters, him to direct the department heads or her to direct the department heads. And so that's exactly the crux of my concern right now.
Through the chair, if I may, Ms. Christensen. I'd say that some mistakes you only get to make once. And certainly when the legal department found out about it, there was discussions about the state of the law, the requirements of the law. I won't speak for the administration and what the administration's position is, but the legal department's advice is always to follow the code and to follow the law. And if we see any processes that are working outside that, our goal is to rectify that.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Any final comments from members? We'll just check the phone here. I don't see anyone who's asked to be in the queue. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for, are you wanting to get in the queue, Mr. Cross?
Yeah, just real quick.
Go ahead.
Regarding, and I asked about the spreadsheet that Felix had brought up regarding the Arctic Center and where we got that information and stuff for. I think we're too far down a gopher hole to wish we had started digging in a different direction, I guess, because when I look at that one, that just brings up more questions, more community involvement, more engineering process. And my fear is that it'll end up costing equal when it's all said and done and only put us off like a year and a half and then push things further down. So, I mean, we look at that with more information, but that one has more questions than answers. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I don't see anyone else in the queue. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to the members of the administration for being here and for the conversation. This item, again, will be before the assembly on Tuesday's meeting. It is item 11E on the agenda. And with that, we are adjourned.